In this video, we're going to learn how to schedule tasks in a Laravel application. We will show where scheduled tasks are defined in a Laravel app, and we'll show some options for invoking tasks in different ways and on different schedules. We'll also write our own scheduled task that publishes blog posts at scheduled times. And finally, we'll also see how to monitor that task effectively using 𝗵𝗽𝗁. So let's get started. Give the video a thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. And let's dive in. So to start with, we have a page here on task scheduling in Laravel. We're going to reference some of the concepts in this page throughout the video. And if we have a quick look at the defining schedule section, you can see that you can define all of your scheduled tasks in a schedule method of the kernel class in the Laravel application. We're going to see that soon, but let's start by creating a Laravel project. I'm going to reference this page, which will be linked in the description. And as it says here, before we try and create a Laravel project, we need to make sure that the machine we're using has PHP and Composer installed. So make sure those are installed. If you need to look at how to do that, check out the previous video we did on monologue in PHP. I'm going to copy this command and we're going to bring up a terminal now. And in this terminal, I'm going to paste the command and we're going to rename the app that we're going to create. And I'm going to call this Schedule Demo. Now that's going to run through the installation process and create the Laravel application in this environment. Now once that's completed, if you run the ls command, you should see the name of that project and you can cd into the project, and we have here everything we need for a Laravel project. Now Laravel comes with a command line tool called Artisan, and if we run php artisan serve, that's going to start a server on localhost port 8000 by default, and we can go to that page on the browser and you can see the default landing page for Laravel. So that's the setup. Let's move on to scheduled tasks. As it said here, we define scheduled tasks in a kernel class. So that's this class here, which defines a schedule method. And the Laravel scheduler is passed in via dependency injection here as a parameter. And within this schedule function, we can define as many scheduled tasks as we want. Now let's go to VS Code and we're going to look at this particular class. So what I'm going to do is stop the server here and I'm going to open this project in VS Code, and that brings up this page here, and what we're going to do is go to the app directory, and within there is a console subdirectory. And here we have a file called kernel.php, and if we open that file we can see the kernel class here. And as the documentation said, this defines a schedule method. So within the class there's a schedule method and we can define our tasks. Now there's a task here that's commented out. What I'm going to do to start with is uncomment that. And what this line of code is going to do is take the Laravel scheduler that's passed in as a parameter here, and it's going to run an artisan command. You can do that with the schedule command method. And the command method takes the name of the artisan command you want to run, and then after you define that, we define the schedule, and the schedule for this one is hourly. Now to demonstrate how this works in this video, we're going to change hourly to every minute, and that is the interval in which this artisan command is going to be run by the Laravel scheduler. And we could define many more lines of code here by using the Laravel scheduler, but how do we actually run these commands? How do we run these tasks? If we go back to the documentation for Laravel, I'm going to find this command, and you can see the section at the top here on running the scheduler, so let's click that. And if we need to run the scheduler, we have a command, an artisan command, and that's the schedule run command. And what this is going to do is it's going to evaluate all of the scheduled tasks that you have in that function, and it's going to determine if they need to run based on the server's current time. So let's try that out. If we go back to the command line, we're going to run the artisan command, and this time it's going to be the schedule command, and it's the run subcommand for that. And you can see that that has run a command, and it's the inspire command, but we don't get any output from the actual command. Output is sent to dev/null. So the output from the command is being discarded, and that's the default behavior for Laravel tasks. It runs the command and it just throws away the output. In order to see the output, we can go back to the command here, and after we call the command every minute, we can use a function here called sendoutput_to. And what I'm going to do is send this output to a file called taskoutput.log. So let's save this, and we're going to go back to the terminal now, and we're going to rerun the command. And this time, if we go back to VS Code, if we look in the application directory, there is now a file called taskoutput.log, and we get the output from the inspire command. Now this artisan command basically outputs an inspirational quote, and you can see the one here, "He who is contented is rich." So that's very inspirational stuff. You can get any number of inspirational quotes by running the artisan inspire command. So let's go back to kernel.php. Now you might notice that this command should run every single minute, But this command that we've run here, the schedule run command, that is a one-off command. So when you execute this command, it's going to run any scheduled tasks at that point in time. But if you have a schedule like every minute here, you need something to be continuously looking and running the commands. So the PHP artisan schedule run command is not going to do that on its own. We either need to run this command using a cron job, or we can run another command, and that's the work command. So what does schedule work do? Let's go back to the Laravel documentation. If we scroll down, we have a section here on running the scheduler locally, and this documents the schedule work artisan command, and this is a command that will run in the foreground, and it will invoke the scheduler every minute until you terminate the command. So let's see an example of this. If we go back to the terminal here, what we're going to do is run this command, and you can see that that is running in the foreground. We don't have control of the terminal now. So the Laravel scheduler is now running, and it's picking up these commands and running them in the foreground every single minute. And that's fine for local development and testing, but in a real system you might want to use a cron job. Now let's go back to the documentation one more time, and we're going to look at this particular command here. You can add a command like this to your cron tab, and we just did a video on using the cron tab, so that should be appearing on the screen now. And the schedule for this command is every single minute, and what we do is we cd to the path of the Laravel project, and then we run the schedule run artisan command, and that's going to then run the scheduler, and any scheduled tasks are going to be run, and that process is going to be executing every single minute. So that's more scalable in a production environment. We use a cron job that will schedule the artisan command here, that will run Laravel scheduler and run any scheduled tasks. Let's now move on. We're going to develop a practical example of a scheduled task in Laravel. So let's go back to VS Code, and what we're going to do is we're going to outline now what we expect this task to do. So let's imagine we had a content website, for example a blog that consists of blog posts, and we want to create a blog post that has particular content, and we want to schedule that content to be released at a particular time. So what we're going to do in order to approach this task is we're going to create a blog database model, and therefore a table in Laravel. We're going to define the migration that will define the schema of that table. We'll then seed the database with some data, and we'll use a Laravel Seeder class in order to do that. And finally, we'll create a custom artisan command that's going to look at the scheduled release date, and it will update whether or not the blog post is released or whether the post is published based on that date. And finally, we'll schedule that to be run using the Laravel scheduler. So we're going to run a custom artisan command. So we'll see how to build all of that up in this video. So we're going to move fast. Let's get started. What we need to do first is we need to tell Laravel about a database that we're going to use in this project. Now, to keep things simple, we're going to use SQLite, which is a file-based database. And you can see here some of the configuration that's needed for that database. So what we're going to do is create the database.sqlite file, and we can use the Linux touch command in order to do that. So let's go back to the terminal here, and if we ls this directory, you can see we have a folder called database. So we're going to go into that directory, database, and we're going to define a database.sqlite file. Now once we've done that, if we go back to the documentation, we define two environment variables here, db connection and db database. Now db connection, this is a simple one, we just set that equal to SQLite, and that's because we're using SQLite as a database here, and we can use Linux's export command to set this environment variable. Now we also need to set the variable for this database here, and that's the actual path to the database file. So what we're going to do here is copy the name of that variable, and we can go to the database directory and we can run the pwd command, print working directory, and that gives us the directory for this database. So let's use the export command, and the name of the variable is db database, and we're going to set that equal to this string here, and then we can append the name of the file to that, and the name of the file was database.sqlite. So all we're doing here is we're telling Laravel how to find this database file here, the SQLite file, and it's then going to use that database to create tables and populate tables with data and so on. Now in order to work with SQLite, you might need to install this extension for PHP. So if that's not already on your system, you can install that, and I'm using PHP 8.2 and it's the SQLite 3 extension, so you can run that apt install command, and you might be prompted for your password here, but that's going to install that into your environment. So now we've told Laravel about the database, what we need to do is we need to actually create what's called a model in the Laravel application. Now we're going to be modeling blog posts, so I want to call this model the post model. And there's an artisan command here, so I'm going to run PHP artisan, and it's the make model command. And this is going to do some automatic code generation, and it's going to create a post model class in our application. But we need to tell it the name of the model to create, so I'm going to pass post as an argument here, and I'm also going to pass the -s flag. And what this is going to do is it's going to create what's called a seeder in the application, and we can later use that to populate the database with some test data. Now we need to be in the right directory in order to run this command, so let's go back to the Laravel application directory, and we're going to run this command, and we can see here that it's created the post.php file, that's the model, as well as the post-seeder.php. So let's now go to VS Code and open the model class. So I'm going to search for post.php, and here we have a Laravel model, and each database table that you create in a Laravel application can be represented by a model class. And if we have some custom logic for getting data from the table or inserting or updating data or so on, we can use the model class for that. Now what we also want to do is we need to define the schema for this database table, and in order to do that we need a migration. Now I'm going to go back to the terminal and we're going to run a new artisan command, and instead of make model it's going to be make migration. And we need to tell Laravel what table we want to make this migration for, and it's going to be the posts table. So that creates this migration file. This is a PHP file, and we're going to use Laravel's schema builder now in order to build up the schema for this database. So I've opened that file now, and what we're going to do is we're going to edit this function here, and that's the up function. And as I said, we're going to use the schema builder, and we've imported the schema facade. So let's use that now, and we can use a function on that, a method called create, because this migration is going to be responsible for creating the posts table. And then we pass a function into that, and that takes a blueprint. As you can see, that's been imported at the top here, and that parameter we're going to call table here, and then we define the body of the function. And what that body of the function is going to do is it's going to define the schema for that database table. So let's start by defining an increments column, and basically this means a primary key for the post table, and we're going to call that column ID. Now what columns do we want in the posts table? I'm going to paste these in, and what we're going to do is go through each of these. So we want a title. Each blog post should have a title, and that's going to be a string based data type. A blog post should also have content, so we're going to create another column here called content, and that's going to be of type text. That could have quite a lot of text, so we don't want to use a string here. We can use a text type column instead. And what the scheduled task that we're going to build later in the video is going to do is it's going to look at the time at which the blog post is scheduled to be released. So we need a date time column here that contains the time that we want to actually release the blog post and make it visible to viewers of our website. And the final column I want to add here is a Boolean column, and that's called published. And when the blog post is released after the scheduled time, what we want the Laravel scheduled task to do is set the published flag to true, and that's going to then release the blog post. We're going to only show the blog posts that are set to true in this published column, and that's the job of our scheduled task, to look at this column, and if the current time is greater than what is scheduled here, we're going to set the published flag to true. So let's save this migration file and go back to the terminal, and we're going to run PHP artisan, and then it's the migrate command. So let's run that, and you can see it's running those migrations. And the one at the bottom here is for our posts table, so hopefully that has been created in the database. Let's now move on to seeding the database with some test data. We're going to go back to VS Code, and what I'm going to do is find the seeder class that was created from the command line. That was called post-seeder.php, and this is a class that is going to actually populate our table with some test data. Now I'm going to bring some imports in at the top here. We're going to use the DB facade, and we're going to use the PHP 𝗵𝗫𝗀 module, and this defines useful utilities for working with date times. And we're also going to use the faker module for generating realistic fake data. Now a seeder class in Laravel has a single method here called run, and it's within this function that we can actually define the logic for creating our test data. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to instantiate the faker object, and we're going to generate a scheduled time here. So let's create a variable called scheduled, and we're going to take the current time by looking at 𝗵𝗫𝗀's now method, and I'm going to add some minutes to the current time for the purposes of this demo. Now we're going to add a random number of minutes between -4 and 4. So we're going to use the PHP empty rand function, and this generates a random value via the Mersenne Twister random number generator, and the random numbers are between -4 and 4. So this is going to add a number of minutes to the current time, but because this might generate negative values, if we add a negative number of minutes, this scheduled time could result in a time that's already passed. And that's going to be useful because when we define our Laravel scheduled task, if a blog post's scheduled time is in the past, what we want to do is set the published flag to true. And on that note, we're going to create a variable called published, and that's going to look at the current time. And if the current time is greater than or equal to the time that's been scheduled above here, then it's going to set published to true. And again, this is all just for seeding the database with some test data. We're now going to use the 𝗵𝗫𝗀 that we imported. So let's copy that. And we're going to use the table method here. And the table we want to target is the posts table. And we're going to call another function here called insert. And what we're going to do is pass an associative array to this. And just to speed things up, I'm going to paste this content in here. We're setting the title, the content, the scheduled and published fields within the table. And for the bottom two, we're using the variables that we created above. For the title, we're using the faker name property. And for the content, we're using faker text. So this is our Seeder class's run method. And the artisan command line tool has a db-seed command. So let's see that now. And what's going to happen when we run that command is it's going to run this method and generate data and insert that into the database. So let's go back to the terminal. I'm going to clear this out, and what we're going to run here is PHP artisan, and it's the db-seed command. And I'm going to pass a class into that, and that's the post seeder class. So it's going to only run code from that class. Let's run this, and we get some info here. I'm going to run this a few times so that we generate some entries in the database, and then we're going to check to see if those entries have actually been populated. Now here's another artisan command coming up. It's PHP artisan tinker, and this gives us a command line tool with access to all of the Laravel utilities that we can use, for example, to interact with the database. So let's bring in the 𝗵𝗫𝗀 here, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the posts table again. So let's get that now, and we're going to use a select method here. And the select method allows you to select particular columns from that table. So we're using the posts table, and we want to get the published and scheduled columns. So we're going to get the values for each of those, and we want to get them for all rows in the database table. So let's run this command, and we get back the following output. We have 4 entries here, and we have published set to false for the first 3 of them. And the reason for that is because the times that were generated randomly here, these were all in the future when the command was run, and it set the published flag to false. But you can see at the bottom we have a timestamp here that was in the past. That was a bit less than the ones above there. So it set published to true because at the time when the command was run, the current time was greater than that scheduled time that had been generated. So we have 1 post here that is set to published, and we have 3 that are not published, but the times that were generated here are actually now in the past. So what I'm going to do is define the Laravel command, and we're going to schedule that, and what we hope to see is that it sets the published flag to true for each of these. So let's now create the artisan command that we want to use here. I'm going to get out of the terminal, and we're going to use another artisan command, and that's the make command. And this is going to generate a custom artisan command class, and we're going to give it the name of release scheduled posts. So let's run this, and it's going to generate a file here, a PHP file. I'm going to copy the name of that and go back to VS Code, and we're going to find that file and go to that class. So this is a class that extends the Laravel command object, and each command in Laravel has a signature, and that's what we pass to artisan. And you can provide a description as well here. The important part of the command in terms of the logic is the handle method that you can see here. And that's where we're going to define the logic now to look at all of the posts in the database. And for the ones that are not yet published, we're then going to look at the scheduled field, and we're going to either release the post or we're going to do nothing. Now in order to perform that logic, we need a couple of imports at the top. So I'm going to import the post model, and we're also going to use Carbon again here. Let's go back down to the handle method, and we're going to define the logic now. So we're going to use the post model, and that has a where function in order to perform some conditional logic on the database table. So we're going to get all posts that have published set to false. So we're only interested in the posts that are not yet published. If something has been published, we don't need to do anything with that. And then we're also going to use the where method to perform another condition. And we're going to look this time at the scheduled field, and we're going to perform a less than or equal to lookup against the current time. So we're going to use Carbon's now method. That will give us the current date time, and we're going to filter down the post table, and we're going to look at that scheduled column, and we're only going to get posts where the scheduled time is in the past. So in other words, if the post's scheduled time is less than or equal to the current time, what we want to do is we want to set the published flag from false to true. So we're going to use another method on 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 here, and that's the update method. And we're updating the published field, and we're going to set that to true. And once we've done that, let's log out some info here, and we're going to say that the post status has been updated successfully. So that's our custom artisan command. It's quite a simple one. It just finds any non-published posts where the schedule date is in the past, and it sets them to be published. So now that we have the command, we can schedule this using the Laravel scheduler. We saw the schedule function earlier on. We're going to define a new schedule command here. So we use the schedule object that's passed in, and we are invoking an artisan command, so we're using the command method. Now we need the signature for the artisan command, so let's go back to our command here, and we're going to copy this string here from the signature field, and we're going to bring that into this function and pass it as a parameter. Now I want to run this every minute, so we're going to use the every minute time schedule here, and that's all we need to do in order to schedule this task every minute. So let's run this using the command that we saw earlier, and that was PHP artisan, and we use the schedule run command. And if we run that, we're going to get some output, and we're seeing that this has failed. Now what I've done here in order to debug this problem is I've looked at the schedule function, and our command is here. What I'm going to do, or what I have done, is send the output to that log file. So let's look at the log file now. And the problem we have is that we have no such column updated at. So Laravel's eloquent framework is trying to update a column that's called updated at, but we don't have that column in the post table. So Laravel expects that there's going to be a created at and an updated at field. So if there's not going to be those fields, we need to tell Laravel that they don't exist. In order to do that, we can go back to the model class, and that's the post model that we created earlier on. And we can define a field in this model, and that's the timestamps field, and we can set that to false. If we save that file and we go back to the terminal and try and rerun this time our command is successfully being executed. So we need to tell Laravel in this case that we don't have the created and updated columns in the post table, and we can do that with the timestamps field by setting it to false in the model. Now the question is, did our task work? Did this task update the published status of any posts that were scheduled in the past? Let's go back to the command line again, and I'm going to run the tinker command, and let's use the db facade here, and I'm going to rerun that command that we saw earlier to get the published and scheduled columns from the post table. So let's run that, and we can see now that all of our posts have a published status of 1, so they're all set to true, and that's because the time at which the scheduled command was run on my system here was in the future compared to all of the scheduled timestamps here. Now what I'm going to do is seed the database with some more entries here, and then we're going to go back to the command line with tinker. And I'm going to rerun the query, and hopefully we see we have some entries now that are not published. In fact, we only have one, and the published date for this one is in 1 minute. So if we quit out of the command line here, and if we rerun the artisan schedule run command, we're going to run the command, but that's not going to update the status of that post. And we can see that if we go back here and rerun the query, the published status is still 0 because this timestamp is in the future, so it's not been scheduled yet, it's not been released yet, and the published flag remains false. And like we said earlier on, this task here that we ran with the schedule run command, this can be scheduled on a Linux system using a cron job, and that's going to be more resilient. Now let's finish this video by seeing how to monitor this scheduled task using a heartbeat on BetterStack. So what we're going to do is go to the browser here, and we have a page on the BetterStack platform for creating what's called a heartbeat. And as it says here, we can track cron jobs and things like serverless workers and be alerted if they don't get run correctly. So let's click the Create Heartbeat button here, and we get asked the question, what service does this track? I'm going to put Laravel Demo as the name of this service, and the heartbeat we expect every 1 minute, so we can set that to 1 minute. And let's give it a grace period of just 5 seconds. The grace period refers to the time that the job needs to execute, and BetterStack recommend a 20% reserve on top of your expected duration. Now the good thing about this is that if your task does not send this heartbeat, you can get some escalation. So for example, you can be notified by a phone call or by an SMS or an email or a push notification if the expected heartbeat is not received. And we also have some options if the on-call person does not acknowledge the incident. We can do nothing, or we can alert other people in the team. So you've got plenty of options here, and you have the security of knowing that your task is successfully executing if these heartbeats are received, and you get the security of being alerted very quickly if something has gone wrong. So let's create the heartbeat, and what we're going to get back here is a page that contains this URL, which I'm going to copy to the clipboard, and we just need to send either a head, get or post request to this URL. So let's do that now within our task. Let's go back to VS Code, and it's within this custom artisan command with the handle method. After we've performed the logic of checking the database table and updating the scheduled posts, what we're going to do is we're going to send an HTTP request to this URL. So I'm going to create a variable called URL and store that value that we copied. and we're going to import and use the Laravel HTTP client. So I'm going to go to this page in the documentation. Again, I'll leave a link to this below the video. And what we're going to do is we're going to import this facade. It's called HTTP. So let's do that now in our task. We're going to go up to the top here and we're going to import that. And it's very simple to use this facade. So let's go back to the documentation. If we want to perform a GET request, for example, we can just use the GET method. So we're going to do that now. Let's go back to the handle method within this artisan command. And we're going to use the HTTP facade, and that has a GET method. And we're going to pass our URL into that method. Once we've done that, we can save the task file. And I'm going to go back to the terminal now. And we're going to rerun the schedule command, and that's going to send the first heartbeat to 𝗵𝗫stack at the end of that process. So it's going to check all of the posts, it's going to set the ones to publish that it needs to, and then after that it's going to send the request to 𝗵𝗫stack. Now, has that been received on the 𝗵𝗫stack platform? If we go back to the page here, you can see that the last heartbeat was recorded 13 seconds ago, so that was received, and 𝗵𝗫stack can now track the recorded heartbeats, and you would see that fill up over time, of course. And we also have some metrics around availability and percentage of downtime as well if you have any incidents. And that's what happens when we don't receive the heartbeats. An incident will be raised and your administrators will be alerted either by email or push notification or whatever you configured in the setup. So as an example of that, if we don't run the task again here, we're not going to receive this heartbeat and the status will change from up to down. So I'm going to pause the video and we're going to restart after that status has changed. And we now have the status changed to down and we have an ongoing incident on the platform. So the last heartbeat was recorded 2 minutes ago and our service has been down for 52 seconds at the moment. And we can click this badge on the incidents panel here to be taken to the incident page. We can see the cause of the incident, which is the missed heartbeat, as well as how long ago that started and the duration of this incident. And at the moment, that is an ongoing incident because it's not been resolved. And you have options here to acknowledge the incident or escalate the incident to inform other people about the problem. And we also have the ability to track the resolution of this incident using this timeline here where you can add comments and post them to the timeline. So this is very useful for administrators that are monitoring these scheduled tasks. If there are any problems and, for example, a heartbeat is not received, they will be alerted immediately and they can take steps to find out what the problem is and resolve that problem, as well as document things that have been done in the resolution of that problem. Now, I received an email as soon as the incident occurred, and that gives immediate transparency to an administrator. They can immediately know that there's a problem and they can resolve that. So that's all for this video. We've seen quite a lot in this video about how to define scheduled tasks in Laravel. We've seen the kernel class in Laravel where you have a schedule method that allows you to define any kind of scheduled task. And what we did in this video is we built our own custom artisan command and we scheduled that using the Laravel scheduler in order to update the status of a post and publish posts that are due to be published based on this scheduled field. And finally, we saw how to monitor these tasks using 𝗵𝗫stack and using heartbeats that you define on the 𝗵𝗫stack platform. So thanks again for watching. If you're interested in more content around scheduled tasks and Laravel, let us know in the comments. Give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this content and subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll see you in the next video.